Okay, we got it. So, hello everyone. I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss a subject close to my heart, dignified menstruation. My name is Erfaan Hussein Babak, and I'm a steering committee member for the Global South Coalition on Dignified Menstruation, representing Pakistan. And I have devoted my professional journey to defending human rights with a keen focus on gender equality. I specialize in sexual and reproductive health rights, striving to support and empower the rights and health of people and communities across diverse landscapes. So with me, I have the immense pleasure of introducing a scholar whose work is at the nexus of international development, public policy and health, Ms. Abigail Lennox from London. And Abigail, if you could kindly introduce yourself.
Yes, so hello, my name's Abigail. I am a PhD student at the University of East London, where I'm looking at dignified menstruation and how that can be used within the UK setting for improving menstrual health outcomes overall. I also did my master's at the London School of Economics. I did that in international social and public policy. And I also have a background in international development with NGO management.
Wow, thank you, Abigail, for the kind introduction. Abigail, to start off, could you enlighten us about what exactly is dignified menstruation, and is it crucial for us to understand and care about it?
Yeah, so I find this a really interesting conversation. So within the UK, where I'm based, a lot of times when we talk about menstruation, a lot of times there's a key focus on the actual 5 days of bleeding, which is one specific part of the whole menstrual cycle. And so for a lot of times, it's very much that key focus. Whereas for me, dignified menstruation broadens the conversation. So it looks at the overall health of an individual. So it looks at not only their menstrual cycle through their physical body, but within the environment that they're in. And it's really about focusing on all menstruators having the right to free from discrimination. Discrimination might be any forms of violence, shaming, or any forms of stigma that is attached to menstruation. And so it's about really opening up that conversation and for us to recognize that it's a natural process that our body goes through, and just acceptance of it as that in all communities. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, so that was a very insightful elucidation of dignified menstruation and its profound significance. So the foundation of understanding the nuances behind this concept is pivotal. And if I may, I would like to ask the audience that how many of you feel that dignified menstruation is a subject that needs more attention and discourse. So let's delve a bit more into the societal perceptions and menstruation. So my next question from you, Abigail, is like from the studies, as you earlier mentioned that you are doing your PhD. So from your study, how do most UK residents view menstruation? And are there particular myths or negative views that are more common?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting in the UK. So coming back to dignified menstruation, we look at the overall health and the menstrual cycle throughout someone's life and make sure that they're free from discrimination. Whereas in the UK context, and probably in other countries as well, there's really a lot of focus just on the 5 days of bleeding. And a lot of times it's around the access to products. So I don't know whether you've heard of this terminology, but a lot of times we talk about menstruation issues through the terminology of period poverty. We had a lot of activists and social change through this. And whilst it's been fantastic, so since I'd say about 2015, there's been a big focus on advocating for rights through this period poverty language. And in that, we've been able to make sure in the UK context that period products, the tax is removed, making sure that people have access to products and toilets. But the problem with using this terminology that it doesn't go as far as what I would like. So there's 3 issues. So firstly, by using the word period, it denotes that it's around the 5 days of bleeding, that it doesn't take into account the other issues that you might have throughout the menstrual cycle. So for instance, your hormone imbalances that you will experience throughout that period. But also by using the word poverty, it creates this idea that it's a lack of resources. And so if you provide the products and the issue's not there anymore. Whereas if we start to look through things through the dignified menstruation lens, it opens up that conversation and says, but what are the other forms of discrimination that people might face? And so although we've done a lot of great work through the period poverty lens, and I do think that I definitely feel that there has been a lot of good progress in the UK, we still have, for example, young children missing school because of their periods, because they still feel too embarrassed to go, or maybe they don't have the correct support. We still have this case of using code names, so I don't know whether you experience this, but when people need to ask for support, rather than saying I have an issue, I need a period product, or can I have some advice on my menstrual cycle, so forth, when they're going to maybe medical or to food banks, we use a lot of code names. So you might see ask for Sally, and they'll know that you mean about your menstruation. So we still use a lot of code names because it's still quite a shameful and taboo subject. And there is still this case of we don't talk about it in the work setting. So if someone has period pain, they're not going to probably tell their worker that that's the reason why. They might come up with an excuse. And we still have this kind of shame and embarrassment about talking about it, or talking about it to the opposite sex. And in fact, there was a study done by ActionAid, which is a charity within the UK, which found that more than 1 in 3 women within the UK have faced period stigma or shaming from their partner. So they've been made to feel embarrassed or made to feel shameful of their body by their own partner. And it raises those questions of, we need to change that mindset that it's a normal bodily function like anything else, and we should be able to talk about it honestly and openly. And yeah, and I find that quite interesting. I think across the different countries, and maybe you can come in with your kind of experiences from Pakistan, but the kind of perceptions that people have around menstruation is still very, still a lot of shame and stigma around it.
Yes, Abby, you are so much right about it. We also have these when young girls they reach a certain age and they reach their menarche. So there are different kind of code words that are being used by them due to the shame and stigma related to it. So the societal fabric indeed plays a critical role in shaping perceptions about menstruation, and it's intriguing to learn about the prevalent myths and views that people hold in the UK. So here I would also like the audience to have you encountered, if they have encountered any such myths or perception in their communities or with themselves, and how have they affected the conversation around menstruation. So moving on, let's explore how these societal perceptions intertwine with gender norms and their impact on menstrual health. So my next question from you, Abby, is how do gender norms and expectations affect issues like period poverty, as you mentioned, and overall menstrual health?
Yeah, so for me, I think this starts from a very young age, that we have these disparities between the genders of how we perceive them. And so they will look different in different families, but you will find that if you were grown up with more of this idea of boys are more empowered and girls are more the caretakers, that also then overlaps within how we view menstruation. And so still for a lot of people, they perceive menstruation as just a woman's issue. It's something not to be talked about in public. It's something that you discuss just with your friends, your female friends, or you keep it very much quiet, and it kind of separates that conversation. And I think that's also an issue, because although there will be people that don't menstruate themselves, they will be interacting, they'll be in relationships, they will have family members who are menstruators, and it's how can they support them and how can they make sure that they are just as much included in society. But because right from an early age we have this idea of separation, and maybe I'm showing my age now, I think the school system has changed, but I know for me, when I first got my period and we had the conversation in school, one of the first things they did is that they asked the boys to leave, and all the girls were kept behind to have that conversation. And already it's creating that idea that this is not important for boys to know about, this is nothing that concerns you, but also that it's something that I need to keep quiet, that it's shameful, you don't talk about in public. And there is that counter argument for some individuals that they will say, but wasn't it creating a safe space for girls and to have those conversations? And to an extent, we do want people to feel comfortable to talk about, but it's also important to normalize the conversation. We wouldn't do that if we were talking about other bodily functions. We wouldn't separate people out into different sex groups. We would actually have the conversation all together, because once you normalize it, then you're giving power to people to be able to then manage their health. And especially when they go into the workforce, they're able to manage the expectations of what can they do through the month, when are they going to be more, maybe I can't have a meeting today because actually I've got really bad period pain, so can actually you take the lead on the meeting, or even just knowing what's normal with your body or not. When you keep it very hidden and secretive, a lot of people then don't know what is normal and what's not. And I find within the UK, especially doing my PhD, the amount of people that have come to me and then said, it took me years to actually find out that my period was not normal. But because we're not talking about it openly, people don't know how is it meant to feel. And it very much diminishes the responsibility of society to make sure that we are supported on this. We should be able to know what's normal, what's not, and then be able to go to our GP or to our doctor and be able to find out, is this normal, what's going on with my body, and be taken seriously, or is there more support that I need in these different areas? So there's still those kind of different dynamics, and I would say definitely we're a very diverse country. So you will also get within the different cultural pockets of the UK different experiences depending on what is normal within that society. And I think that's what's really interesting about the UK as well, is that you will find across the whole country, there will be different gender norms around menstruation. So for some other people, it might be more of a case of, yes, they're not able to go to social events, or they're not allowed to wear certain clothes while they're menstruating. And for others, it might be more of a case of they're not allowed to talk about it in public. It's very much frowned upon to speak to a male family member about this. So it will look different in the different areas.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. And it as you earlier mentioned, so it reminded me of our school time. So when we used to be in schools and we be during the biology class, and when the chapter about reproductive health would come, then our teachers never read those chapters to us, and they would say that you should read it by yourself and learn from it. Though when it comes to reproductive systems of frogs and animals, so there was no issue with that. But when it comes to human reproductive health or reproductive system, so they would skip that chapter entirely and they would tell us that you should read these in your homes and by yourself. So it's
And it
we
does,
would really
it creates this disparity, because at the same time, I had this conversation with my father-in-law. It's one of these things, when you do a PhD in menstruation, it's interesting who you talk about periods with. But for him, it was this case of, he was never taught about this in school. But then, of course, his wife is going to go through the menstrual cycles. And when she gets to her menopause, what does that look like? And it creates this barrier between the conversations, because for a lot of men, they actually don't know what their wives are going through, or they don't know what their daughters are going through. And there's just this assumption of they'll be able to figure this out. They should know. Go to your mom, or go to a female person to figure this out. But we will all interact with people that have this support, and we wouldn't do that with poor mental health. There's this big idea that we need to also get across that shame and stigma, and that actually we need to be aware of how do we support people, although we might not personally be going through that ourselves. And I think it's really important just to normalize the conversation. Like you said, why did you have to read those pages in private? Why couldn't you just have that conversation in a school, in an educational system, and make sure that you're being informed correctly of the menstrual cycle?
Yeah, because they feel shame. There is a stigma or taboo attached to it so much that the teachers, they even hesitate to discuss this openly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clear that gender norms significantly influence menstrual health and access to menstrual products. Understanding this intersectionality provides a more holistic view. So I'm curious to know how many people here who are watching us believe that addressing gender norms can lead to better menstrual health outcomes. So now let's turn our attention to successful initiatives that have been strides in reshaping perceptions about menstruation. So my next question from you, Abby, is about, could you highlight some initiatives from the Global South during your studies or the PhD studies that you are doing that have made a positive change in how menstruation is perceived?
Yeah, so as part of my PhD, I'm looking at the UK context of how do we improve mental health outcomes, but I'm really keen to take teachings from the Global South. For a long time, menstrual health and looking at dignified menstruation has been focused within Global South countries, and it's a lot of times it's been around the water, sanitation and hygiene framework. But over the so many few years, the Global South have really been progressing, and this is where we've got organizations like the Dignified Menstruation Coalition that are looking at not just addressing the sanitation and health and hygiene, but also looking at the overall well-being of people and making sure that they're free of discrimination. And so I was really keen to take learnings from the Global South. And so I spent just under a month in Nepal, and I'm also continuing to discuss, to work with different organizations to understand what they're doing. And it was really interesting and fantastic to see the work. And I just kind of wanted to point out one key one that kind of stuck in my mind, is that we went to a school in a rural area, and the coalition had been working with them for quite a bit of time on encouraging dignified menstruation. And one of the first things that as you walk in the school, on the wall is a song written out on the wall about dignified menstruation. And it talks about how it's pure, it's clean, and kind of debunking all these myths and taboos that we have around it. And I really loved the fact that firstly, it was just on the wall for everyone to see. It wasn't kind of hidden down a corridor somewhere. It was very much in the public, but also all the children had learned the song, and it really started to really open up the conversation just to normalize it. And it was just really fantastic to see that these children singing this song, because from a very young age then, they're already starting to change those perceptions of maybe what they already apparently might think. And some of these children were young as 5, 6 years old who were learning that song. So although they personally weren't at the stage of puberty, they were already starting to understand that it's a normal process. So hopefully by the time they get to the point of going through this, it's already a normalized conversation. It's okay to talk about. There's no embarrassment, there's no shame and stigma. And I really love that creative art that I think in the UK, we do it a lot with children, but we don't necessarily do a lot of creativity with adults when it comes to addressing these type of things within our policies. But yeah, that was like a fantastic example for me. And just hearing all these children sing this song and just thinking they're going home probably to their families and they're singing this song, and for their parents to hear it, because again, it's not their parents' fault, it's generational. You learn over the time and you carry on living the type of life that you think is normal, but already what kind of spread that song would be having within that local community was fantastic to see. And you probably have lots of great examples yourself of what great work has been happening in the Global South.
Yeah. So actually, our organization, The Awakening, we are also working on women empowerment issues, especially sexual reproductive health rights. And we at The Awakening believe like menstruation is a natural biological process which has been enveloped in stigmas and taboos for centuries, posing grave challenges to the well-being and the dignity of women and girls around the globe. So The Awakening, realizing the urgent necessity to reshape societal norms and perspective on menstruation, has been working fervently on engaging men and boys in dignified menstruation. So the core objective of The Awakening's endeavor is to address the pivotal role men can play in transforming the narrative around menstruation. And the engagement of men in the dignified menstruation is imperative due to multiple reasons. Like, men and boys play a significant role in influencing perception and decisions within the families, within schools, communities, and at a broader societal level. So by engaging them, The Awakening seeks to eliminate the culture of stigma and taboo associated with menstruation, thereby forging an environment where dialogues related to menstrual needs are normalized and women and girls can freely discuss their concerns without fear of ridicule or embarrassment. So we believe that men's participation is indispensable in creating environments that are supportive of women's menstrual needs. Just earlier, as you mentioned, even your life experiences. So their understanding and advocacy can lead to improved access to menstrual hygiene and better sanitation facilities, contributing to the overall health and well-being of women. So when men, who are often the decision makers in various aspects of society, whether in their homes or outside, they are the main power holders and they have the authority within our cultural norms and society. So they are, if they are well informed and supportive of menstruation, so it will accelerate the progress in achieving menstrual equity. So we at The Awakening organizes extensive sessions focused on dignified menstruation with boys, aiming to educate them about the biological, social, and emotional aspects of menstruation. So these sessions serve as a platform for open and candid discussions, enabling boys to gain an insight into the challenges faced by women and girls and encouraging them to become advocates for change within their respective communities. And so by emboldening men and boys to actively participate in dismantling the taboos around menstruation, The Awakening is facilitating the creation of a more empathetic, informed, and equitable society where the dignity of every individual is upheld, irrespective of gender.
And that's really interesting, actually, that you use the power word, because I think it's about bringing it as a societal issue and seeing that actually to make change, we need everyone to take part in this. It's kind of looking at, for a long time, at least in the UK, sexual violence, it was often put on the responsibility of women that, well, you need to change how you act or behave to make sure that you are free from violence. But actually, there's been a different change more recently about, but what about the men and the boys? How can they also be involved? And it's the same with menstruation. It's about saying there's different power dynamics, and actually to create equal power, we need everyone at the table, and we need everyone to have this conversation to understand how they can support different people within this. So I find that really interesting that you're engaging men and boys in this conversation as well, because they too can, although they don't personally experience it, they can also be a powerful change within this, and also for the generations going forward, because then they can also teach the younger generation of that it is normal and how to be inclusive and have those conversations.
Yeah, those initiatives that you shared are truly inspiring and highlight the transformative power of targeted actions and policies. So given the diverse cultural landscape, it's essential to explore the potential challenges and consideration in adopting such successful initiatives from the Global South in the UK. So my next question would be, with the cultural gap between the UK and the Global South that we discussed, so what should we be wary of when trying to adopt their methods?
So I think for me, it's been a very interesting journey. When I say that I wanted to take teachings from the Global South and implement them in the Global North, and even that terminology, Global South, Global North, I don't really like it because it's creating this separation when there shouldn't be. But I think there's already a lot of great work happening. And rather than this idea that, oh, we need to create something new for our country, for me, it was about learning what else is already happening there and can it be implemented in our country. And I found within both settings, so when I spent time in Nepal, but also when I spend time in UK, when I tell people that I'm wanting to do this, a lot of times when I was in Nepal, the question was, oh, you have this issue too in the UK? I thought you guys were very progressive, or you don't have this issue and you're allowed to go to work. And likewise in the UK, it would be a case of, oh, but isn't their experiences very different to ours? How can then you could take those teachings? So we have this very separate idea of what the issues is, and correct, there are different experiences, and what some people might face in a different country because of the different cultural dynamics may be different. But what was really interesting for me is that within all these experiences, both within the UK and within Nepal and other countries across the Global South, is there still this underlying emotion of fear. So whether that's fear of embarrassment, so embarrassed that someone's going to find out I'm on my period, so I'm going to hide the product while I go to the toilet, maybe in the UK, to maybe fear of shame or fear of something bad happening to your family, fear of stigmatization. There's this emotion that dictates our behavior, which is similar. And that's what I'm very interested in, is that how do we change our perceptions and the behavior that people are exhibiting that makes us free to be who we want to be, free to have a dignified menstruation. And so this is where I wanted to really look at, okay, the methods that are implemented. And I really like how in different countries across the Global South, creativity is used quite a lot when tackling topics that have a lot of taboo and stigma around them. So my time spent there in Nepal, I found that along with songs, a lot of people use poetry, a lot of people use arts. I think yourself, even when I was speaking to you, you talked about how you have a comic book, which is fantastic. And I really love how the creative arts is used on topics where there's a lot of shame, fear, taboo, and how do we then overcome it? Because when you ask people to talk about this, people don't feel comfortable enough to open about it, to speak about it. But when you use creativity, it's really interesting to see what else they can express. And usually it's worth a lot more than what they feel they can verbally say. And so for me, whilst there might be cultural differences, actually, how can creative arts be used? And so one of the things I want to take back, and this is what I'll be doing over the next year, is looking at art-based focus groups. So how can we use art to change our behaviors and perception, and see what people draw and see what comes out of those group sessions, rather than having people just sit around and talk, because I don't think we'll get as much. It's kind of breaking through that barrier. And I think that's what I'm really interested in. You will definitely have a lot more expertise than me, but how creativity is used. And maybe you could tell people a bit more about the comic book, because I just found that absolutely fascinating to hear about.
Yeah, so we had developed these comic books as an interactive session within the schools and within the communities, to learn it better and understand. So the comic book basically is a story of a young girl that is going through her menarche, her first period. And when it comes, because our target audience were the adolescent girls in schools, and especially in rural areas. So we developed the story around this young girl who is experiencing her first menstrual cycle, and her body is going through different kind of changes, and like how she's panicking, and she's curious to know that what's going on with her body, and all when the blood comes, so what's going on and what is happening within her body. So we are addressing those challenges, and there is another character of a teacher in that comic book, who then tries to then educate the young girl about the bodily changes that is going on in her body, and that it's a normal thing, because there are certain taboos attached to it. There are certain like misinformation attached to menstrual health when it comes to menstrual health. So even like in schools here also, when girls in rural areas, girls get periods, then they are sent off to homes. In spite, they should be supported within the school. So the schools lacks the capacity to help and support these young girls. So the comic book is all about that, and how they could manage themselves. And it's a very interesting story. It's a story, we have put it in a story, so whoever reads it can learn a lot from it, about how they can manage uh, themselves during their periods when they are menstruating. So it's about that, and it's really interesting. So I was wondering, when you shared about the art and the use of art, like as you experience in Nepal, and you are looking forward to implement or talk about it within the UK context. So I was wondering, like, if art is being used as a tool within UK or in the school curriculums on other subject matters also, and would it be easier for you to talk about it, like talking about menstruation and linking it with art within UK context?
Yeah, so in the UK, art-based is used, but it's more within schools that it's potentially used, or it's potentially used as a therapy, but within the adult community, it's not as readily used. A lot of times, around menstruation, at least, there's been a large focus on, as long as we provide the products and we signpost you, then this shouldn't be the issue. Because again, going back to our previous conversation about how menstruation is framed within the UK, we often look at it through this lens of period poverty. So the idea of that there's a lack of resources. If we give the resources, then we don't have a problem. And depending who you speak to as well within the UK, because we're a very diverse country. So there's some people that don't think we have a stigma or taboo, but there's others that will have very similar experiences. because of the different cultures that we have and the different ways people live. And so firstly, we need to understand within the UK, what are the current perceptions? And we haven't really got that at the moment in time. We've got a lot of surveys that focus on, do you have access to products? But not as much on the perceptions and attitudes of everyone on menstruation. And then it's actually working with those groups. And I really like the use of art-based, so within the adult community. So it's not only about providing products, but actually let's have these discussions, but use it through art-based exercises, because I think it'll be really interesting to see how people communicate through art. And I think that was what was really unique that I saw within Nepal, that some people were quite shy to talk about it, but then they would come the next day and they would have been up all night and they've written a poem, and they were able to share a poem, or they were able to share a song. And so you have these, it's the same person, but they're too shy to talk about it. But through the use of art, they feel empowered to communicate a lot better how they're feeling. And I think this is maybe something that's done more in the global south than the global north, within the adult community, at least. I think a lot of times creativity, arts, it's this idea that it's for children. But to be able to have that with adults and say, okay, well, draw me a picture. What are your perceptions? How do you feel about it? And it'll be interesting to see what they draw along with what they say, and see actually, can that help to change behaviors and perceptions by using a bit more creative arts in breaking down those barriers that you often find with verbal communication.
That's really, really very interesting. So it's crucial to approach adaptations with cultural sensitivity and contextual understanding. So here I would like audience say that, do you think it is feasible to incorporate these approaches considering the cultural variances, or are there potential modifications you would suggest? So dwelling deeper into this, let's discuss the foreseeable challenges and adaptations needed in integrating techniques from the global south within the cultural and societal framework of the UK. So my question to you, Abby, is given the cultural variances, do you foresee challenges when trying to use global south techniques within the UK?
So I think, again, it's having open dialogue. I think this is one of the really exciting things about these doing my PhDs, being able to talk to people, getting your experiences, your expertise in these fields, and saying, okay, well, how might these adapt to the UK setting? So there might be some things that just wouldn't fit. For example, within the creativity, I can't imagine I'd get many men willing to sing a song, whereas it might be more appropriate that in other cultures, it's very normal to sing a song, as talked about within the song within the school. But there's different ways of using creativity, and it's about how can we use it and adapt it to the cultural norms of the UK. And I think also just open this dialogue, because again, there seems to be a lot of a barrier. This global north, global south idea in that things have to be done very differently, or it's about, a lot of times, if things are overtaken, there's a lot of idea of taking teachings from the global north and implementing them in the global south, whereas actually I think we need to flip that as well and say, but what can we learn from you? Because there's a lot of fantastic work happening, and you will have already a foundation. So when I have conversations with you and with Radha and other people, you'll be able to tell me what worked, what didn't, what do I need to think about? So having this open dialogue, you might bring to my attention something that I've not even thought about. So when I'm doing a focus group session, have you thought about this situation? Maybe try this instead, because you've already got that foundation of knowledge. And it's about knowledge sharing and learning. And they might look different in the different countries and the different contexts, but I do think there's a lot of overlap that we can take from one another and implement within our countries. And again, as well, within the UK, we have a very diverse country, and we will have people that have moved from India, Nepal, Pakistan, different people from different places that might practice different things than others. And so it's being aware of that, about how do we support all people within the UK and make sure that they are supported on this, and we're not just supporting a pocket of people. We need to really expand that conversation and see, well, how is menstruation experienced in the different locations of the UK? Is there any practices that are discriminating people, but it's not seen, or their voices are not heard? And really opening that conversation.
So I'm curious to know about a little bit more about the, as you mentioned, like the diverse culture that the US have, the UK have, and there are people from all around the world that are there. And uh, how do you see like so much people with so much diversity around? Like for example, if students from India, Nepal, Pakistan, or any other European country are sitting within a same classroom, and they are being taught about menstrual health, hygiene, or dignified menstruation. So how do you see, is it possible for the curriculum to be developed, keeping all the diverse cultures in mind?
Yeah, I think firstly it's about normalizing the conversation to begin with. I think if we normalize the conversation within educational systems and help normalize the conversations across the genders and across the generations, then we might start to learn about different people's experiences. Because right now within the UK, though there has been some research done, there isn't enough. So we actually don't know what the perceptions are, or all the behaviors or the practices. And we need to know that first. We need to have that open dialogue. So then we can start to see, well, are any of these practices discriminating the person? Are they aware of this? How do we empower people? How do we encourage dignified menstruation within the UK? So I think the first thing is just to open this dialogue, because it's not really a conversation we've had a lot. It's for a long time, anything around menstruation has been very much a conversation behind closed doors. And even now, although we've had a lot of progression since 2015 with the period poverty campaign, and we've seen the taxes removed off products, and we've seen you can now go into public toilets and you might find period products there available, there is still a lot of stigma and shame attached to it. And we still have a long way to go. But to do that, we need to start, firstly, I personally think, by having these discussions and saying this is an important area that we need to do the research. We need to understand what is the basic understanding, perceptions, attitudes within the UK. And then, okay, well, how do we then work with people? How do we make sure that the different cultures are included? Because you will find it as well within, I'm sure, in Pakistan and Nepal, across the regions, people will maybe practice different ways. They might have different perceptions. And so again, it's still working with that. But yeah, it's very much having those open dialogues and saying it's okay to have this conversation. It's not a shameful conversation. Even just down to, I know in the UK, a lot of people still use the word sanitary products, and already that creates an idea that it's unhygienic, it's dirty. So there's already that unconscious idea that we have. So it's just going to take time. And this is where you just have to continue to work and develop with people, because this isn't something that's happened overnight. We've grown up historically with this gender inequality, and menstruation is one of those first things from a very young age that creates this difference, that there's this power dynamic, this power imbalance between people. And I guess looking intersectionally, as you said, looking across the different, what impact does that then have in other areas?
Yeah, that's because dignified menstruation is a broader term, and it covers all, like the, as you mentioned, the period poverty, or it's menstrual health, hygiene management, or it covers all these. Do you have any example, or have you any examples come up to you, like these discussions being going on about dignified menstruation or period poverty within schools or within the communities? Have you experienced anything like this within the community?
So within
Or
my
within
university, we're working at the moment in time with different organizations to bring a dignity framework into menstruation. And that's been a lot of fantastic work, because it's again saying that it's great what's happened with period poverty. I think it's really brought it on the mark, and I feel that people are aware of it, but it's saying, okay, now we need to take it to the next step, and we need to continue this dialogue, and we need to continue to expand and learn. And so for me, part of my research is bringing that dignity lens to the UK. It's about having these dialogues with different communities and saying, how do we expand it? But first, it's about bringing people's awareness to it. So even just this, with the Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation, they work with a lot of organizations, and some of them are based in the UK, and they're promoting this work, and that's fantastic. So you'll find different pockets are encouraging this framework of implementing a dignity lens. And it's fantastic to see all these different organizations, and the fact that people come together. There's a lot of learning, a lot of expanding. And again, the more you talk about it, the more research and understanding follows with this. And I think that's really important, because right now, because it's been such a hidden topic, it's such an under-researched and underdeveloped issue. So for example, there was a recent research that came out. It was about the England football team, and they started to notice that the women kept getting knee injuries compared to the men, and they didn't really understand why, because they have the same fitness level, they have the pretty much similar skills. So why are the women experiencing more knee injuries? And they did a 4-year study, and it became apparent that during the menstrual cycle, your body is more prone to injuries at different areas at different times. And so you have to be careful, because it's essentially, it's a hormone imbalance that you have in your body. And it's really interesting things like that we probably don't even know as much about the menstrual cycle, but because we're not talking about it, we don't have enough research on this. And so we need to open up this dialogue and see, well, what are the other inequalities? What are the other things that we need to be aware of? How do we empower people when it comes to menstruation? And it's not just the 5 days of bleeding. That's such a small part. It's from the very first period up through to the menopause and through that. And so there's a lot of research, there's a lot of conversations that need to be had, so that we can learn and expand and become more inclusive, because we're all our one body. We can't get rid of our menstruation. We can't get rid of it. So we have to learn how to include it within our life, how to normalize it, that maybe some weeks I'm not going to be able to work to the same level that maybe I am for the other 3 weeks, and so forth. So it's really starting to learn and progress our thoughts around the menstrual cycle.
Yeah, and so as you mentioned, it's really fantastic to see like how the Global South Coalition on Dignified Menstruation has expanded, and all the credit goes to Radha and Sapna and all the secretariat team. I myself was introduced to this concept by Radha, and I learned a lot from her about this concept. So we were like doing work around menstruation, but when I got the trainings from them, then I learned a lot about it. I'm really thankful to Radha for this, and the Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation for also giving us the opportunity to learn more about this important topic. Moving further, addressing these challenges will indeed be crucial for successful implementation and resonance with the local context. So I have a question for the audience also. So how many of you believe that incorporating diverse methodologies is essential for evolving the discourse on menstrual health? And before going further, I would like to share that today is the 28th September. And as we observe International Safe Abortion Day, so we stand in solidarity with women and all individuals with reproductive capacity around the world, affirming their right to autonomy, dignity, and health. And access to safe and legal abortion is a fundamental human right that should be available to every individual, irrespective of where they live on their economic status. And no one should have to risk their lives or well-beings due to lack of access to safe reproductive healthcare services. It is not just a matter of health, but of justice, equality, and human rights. And every preventable death or injury resulting from unsafe abortion is a tragic testament to the work that still lies ahead of us. So let this day serve as a reminder of our collective responsibility to dispel myth, combat stigma, and advocate for evidence-based policies that prioritize the health and rights of individuals. And by doing so, we can create a world where everyone has the freedom to make decisions about their own bodies without fear or constraint. So moving ahead, my next question from you, Abby, is how might the UK and the Global South collaborate more closely to enhance menstrual health outcomes for all?
Yeah, so I think just again, opening this dialogue, having these different conversations, we need to have an area for knowledge sharing. And I think this is what a great hub that the Global South Coalition has created, is that there is room for knowledge sharing of how we can adapt. And even just having this webinar where we're bringing two minds together, we have different perceptions, we have different awarenesses, understandings, and having this conversation is really empowering. And I just think we need to continue this, and I think really start to create a bit more power between the areas of the globe. I think there's still this disparity, and this is again, I personally don't like to use the word global south because it creates this differences, global north, global south. I think actually all countries have their unique settings. They have their barriers, their inequalities. And I think we need to just continue having these conversations and letting all voices be heard so that we can start to understand and learn from them. And definitely for me, it's still a learning progress, and it's very much about being humble and hearing about, well, what work is being done, because I don't have all the answers, and it's about research. And that's one of the things I love to do, is research. Is about learning about what's already there, where are the potential gaps or limitations, and how can we continue to progress and develop. And so it's always about working together, and bringing those different perceptions and viewpoints together to see how can we continue to advance. Because again, I hope that within 10 years we get to the next stage where we're like, okay, we were able to achieve that, now how do we develop it further? So we're always going to be constantly moving, constantly changing, because it's unfortunately, it's not something that can be fixed overnight. A lot of these taboos, shames, and stigma that people have been built up over the centuries. And even how our lives are lived, even having 9 to 5 working days, does that actually fit within the menstrual cycle? Probably not. If the working environment was adapted to a woman's need, maybe the hours that you work would be different. Maybe you would work for longer days, but then you maybe have a week off every month. I don't know. So there's different ways that things can be adapted, and continuing to have those dialogues and conversations will help us to see where the gaps and limitations are, or where the similarities are as well. And I think, again, for me, there is still a lot of similarities. And I think I come back to this word fear. There's our experiences might be different, but underlying that is that fear of embarrassment, fear of shame, fear of discrimination. And how do we overcome that fear that we seem to have internally, and that then impacts our behavior? And that's fear that both women have, but also men. Fear of talking about it, fearing that it's going to be shameful to talk about it, or that it's nothing that you should be involved in. So how do we change that behavior?
Yeah. So establishing strong collaborative frameworks can indeed leverage diverse strengths and insight, paving the way for impactful advancement in menstrual health. Uh, just a thought to share that the intersectional approach of linking dignified menstruation with the International Day for Safe Abortion advance the broader goal of reproductive justice, gender equality, and women's rights in various cultural contexts. So, Abby, do you want to say anything about this?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to, when we look at menstruation, is look at also the intersecting inequalities that we face elsewhere. And I think we really need to start doing more research, and there is more research happening, different areas of work that's been done, which is great. But it's starting to see the connection between, for example, dignified menstruation and safe abortion, or child marriages, or sexual violence. We really need to start to learn these intersections, because inevitably a lot of the discrimination that faces gender inequality, it's people being faced from a very young age this idea that there's this difference, this power dynamic, and how does that then impact you as you grow up in society and become adults. So I definitely think more work needs to be done on that, and I'm very excited to see that there is new research being done. Even myself, I'm part of a research that's looking at that connection, which is very exciting to see what comes of that. But I think for me, opening this conversation will open these other avenues to see, well, what is the connection? What are the perceptions? What does this potentially lead to? I don't know what your thoughts and feelings are on this.
So there's a lot to share about it, but we are running out of time. So I'll just move to the next question very quickly. So
Okay.
as you continue your work, what are the upcoming areas of focus in advocating for dignified menstruation in the UK?
For me, it's I'm really interested in looking at this as a societal issue. This is not just a woman's issue, but also that this is across the different social statuses. Again, with using the period poverty terminology, by even using the word poverty, it denotes that it's an issue only in the low socioeconomic class. So more likely, a lot of the implementations has been for maybe schoolgirls, because they're more likely to not have money to buy products, or it's been for people that are homeless, or maybe on benefits that need additional governmental support. But actually, for me, this is across all the social statuses, and actually we need to broaden this conversation and see how this isn't just an issue for the lower class. This is across all the different statuses. We have this shame and stigma. So a part of mine is expanding that conversation and opening this dialogue, and hopefully next year I can tell you a bit more about my research. But this, I'm kind of entering into my fieldwork stage, where I'll be starting with a survey to firstly get the current perceptions of individuals within the UK. And then I'll be conducting focus groups. And I really want to do them in different communities to get the variety of what people's perceptions are. So hopefully in a year, I'll be able to tell you a bit more about my findings from that. But yeah, it's a very exciting time. And I really like how there's a lot more conversations having on menstruation, which is fantastic. There's a lot of more people coming into this field, having these conversations. And I think just the more we talk about it in the different angles we're coming from, it's just going to bring it more to the public sphere and help us just develop and progress further with our perceptions of this.
Yeah, wow. It's really inspiring to see the continuous efforts in promoting dignified menstruation. So are there any areas that the audience feels should be prioritized in the advocacy for dignified menstruation? Moving ahead, Abby, your insight and future directions are indeed illuminating and instill hope of substantial progress in achieving dignified menstruation for all. And it's essential that we all as a collective continue to foster dialogue, advocate for change, and work towards dismantling stigmas and barriers surrounding menstruation. So as we draw to a close on this enlightening discussion on dignified menstruation, it is pertinent to mark your calendars for an upcoming significant day, 8th December. So on December 8th, we will be commemorating International Day for Dignified Menstruation, a day dedicated to promoting menstrual dignity and eliminating the stigmas and taboos associated with it. And the theme for this year is Dignified Menstruation is Integral for Ending Sexual Violence and Child Marriages. And Abby, do you have any plans to mark the 5th Dignified Menstruation Day?
So at my university, we have Dr. Mira Tairari. She's someone that does a lot of work within promoting menstruation through the Dignity Framework. So both Mira and myself will be hosting a workshop on the 7th of December. So it's the day beforehand, but it's around the dignity on menstruation, and that'll be a fantastic day. We're going to be hosting a workshop and just, again, sharing knowledge, expanding and promoting that dignity framework. So that's what we'll be doing. So I will share the information for anyone that is in the UK that would like to come to the University of East London for that day. It'd be fantastic to have you there.
Wow, we really look forward to it, and do share these information with us, and Lal could share it within the WhatsApp group or on the social media pages. So before we conclude, Abigail, could you please grace us with a message regarding this impactful day?
This has just been fantastic conversations. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for anyone that's been listening in. If anyone is interested in carrying on the conversation with me, I'm sure the team can share my email address with you, but I really think this is really great organization and just becoming a hub to share this knowledge. And thank you so much, Erfaan, for your insightful questions and comments, and I really am interested in the work that you're doing as well in Pakistan. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abby. And this occasion serves as a beacon of hope and a reminder of the persistent efforts and strides we all are making in fostering an environment where every individual, regardless of their gender, can discuss and understand menstruation with respect and dignity. So thank you, Abigail, for enlightening us today. And thanks to our audience for their engaging participation. Thank you very much.
Thank